The phone rang, a jarring electronic bird in the still apartment. It felt like it was drilling right into my skull, even before I registered the sound. I didn't pick it up. No. Not this time. Just let it sing its insistent song, each. It stopped. Then it started again, even more aggressively with a sigh that felt like it. Yeah? Gabriel? It's him, David. My old professor. The one who always looked like he owed me. Big time. I'd spent an entire weekend, a whole glorious. And beneath a pile of academic journals and probably a rogue sandwich crust. He'd promised me anything. Anything at all. And here he was, calling. Hey, Professor, I said, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. It was a skill I'd honed, that ability to smooth over the rough patches with a veneer of politeness. What's up? I'm calling about the position, I could picture him now, hunched over his desk, the scent of old paper and stale coffee wafting around him. And the research assistant role. They're interviewing candidates next week, and your name came up. My stomach did a little flip. Not a good flip, not a joyous somersault. But more of a hesitant lurch, like a car starting on a steep incline. This was it. The thing I'd been working towards, or at. Oh. Great, I managed. Thanks for thinking of me. I tried to. And yes, well. He cleared his throat, a sound. There's a complication. A complication. Of course. Nothing was ever easy. Nothing ever just happened. My left knee started bouncing, a nervous tremor. It was a physical manifestation of my internal. What kind of complication? They're looking for someone. More direct experience in client-facing roles. Client-facing. Me? I spent most of my days wrestling with. My interactions were primarily with inanimate objects and I did have a knack for explaining complex shit to people who didn't know their ass from a hole in the ground. Though. It was a survival skill, really. Polish? I repeated, the word feeling clunky on my tongue. Yes. He seemed to be searching for the lead researcher, Dr. Anya Sharma. She's particular. She needs someone who can handle themselves in high-pressure situations. High pressure. I remembered the time my dad had lost his temper. The air in the kitchen thick with the scent of burnt toast and unspoken accusations. He'd slammed his fist on the table, making the salt shaker jump and the cutlery clatter. That felt pretty high pressure. This was different, though. This felt professional. A different kind of intensity altogether. Right. So, what does that mean for me? I asked, my voice flat. The knee bouncing had stopped. It was replaced by a cold stillness. It means, this man paused, and I could practically. Not without some evidence of your capabilities. He needed proof. Proof that I wasn't just some hermit who lived in the glow of a monitor. Fueled by caffeine and a deep-seated aversion to small talk. And proof that I was more than the sum of my solitary hours. Evidence? Something tangible, Gabriel. Something that shows you can navigate difficult interactions. I thought about the time my neighbor, this woman who always wore too much lavender perfume. The kind that clung to your clothes long after she'd gone, had tried to tell me what to do with my recycling bin. She'd pointed, her finger sharp and accusatory, and I just stood there, arms crossed, and stared. That was an interaction. A difficult one, in its own way. It had required a certain amount of stoicism. I'll think about it, I said. It felt like the most I could offer at that moment. Good. Good. He sounded relieved, like a student who'd. Let me know if anything materializes. He hung up. Materializes. Right. Like I was a magician, conjuring up proof of my professional prowess. And the phone sat there, a dead black rectangle on the scratched wooden table. My father's old chess set was still out from last week. The pieces frozen mid-game, a silent testament to a battle I'd walked away from. I'd been about to win, too. The queen was poised for a checkmate, just a single move away from victory. I'd felt the familiar urge to just stop. To leave it there, unfinished. And I had. The pieces remained, a monument to my indecision. I walked over to the window. Outside, the sky was a bruised purple, you know how it is. You expect something, a dramatic downpour, a cleansing. A flat, unremarkable twilight. The kind of sky that just hangs there, a muted backdrop to the ordinary. This woman. My ex. And she'd called last month, out of the blue. We hadn't spoken in years, not since the messy, drawn-out conclusion of our relationship. She'd sounded different. Happier, maybe. Less coiled. She was getting married. To some guy who apparently did something important with numbers. Finance, I think he'd said. And she wanted to know if I'd be there. A wedding invitation, delivered by voicemail. I told her I couldn't. Not because I didn't want to, not really. But because I knew if I went, if I saw her standing there, radiant and with someone else, I wouldn't be able to control myself. I'd probably do something stupid. Like tell her I still had her old band t-shirts. The worn-out ones, the ones with the faded logos, the ones that smelled faintly of old concerts and cheap beer. It was a dumb thing to hold on to, but it was mine. The silence in the apartment was suddenly deafening. It wasn't a comfortable silence, the kind you find in a quiet library. It was a charged silence, heavy with the. I walked to the kitchen. The light bulb overhead was flickering, casting uneven shadows. I needed to change that. But later. Always later. This research position. David needed proof. What kind of proof? What did navigate difficult interactions even mean in a practical sense? Did it mean not flinching when someone raised their voice? Or did it mean something else? I remembered a conversation with my mother, years ago. And I was trying to explain why I didn't want to go into law like my older brother. The golden child, the one who always knew the right thing to say. She just looked at me, her expression flat. You'll regret it, Gabriel, she'd said, her voice devoid of any emotion, a statement of fact rather than a prediction. You always do. It was delivered with the same tone she might use to inform me that the milk had gone sour. That was it. She'd made it clear. My choices, my desires, they were secondary. An afterthought. And something to be managed. So I decided to make myself the main event. For once. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text. From my landlord. A picture of a leaky faucet in the. Followed by a single word, fix. I stared at it. The water droplet, frozen in its eternal descent. He'd been avoiding my calls for weeks, ever. The one that looked like it was about to give way, like a giant, plaster-filled yawn. He'd called me a nuisance. A busybody. He wanted me to fix his faucet? The man who wouldn't even acknowledge the potential. I deleted the text. Then, with a sense of purpose that felt both alien and exhilarating, I picked up my laptop. Time to do some research. Not the dusty, old book kind, the kind that involved digging. Unearthing. I needed something tangible. Something that screamed, this guy can handle pressure. I opened a new tab. Typed in the name of Dr. Anya Sharma's Research Institute. Then, her name. And then, the word that felt like a key, a whisper of possibility, controversy. You know how it is. Sometimes you have to create your own opportunities. Or, at least, highlight the ones that already. There was a small article. Dated from last year. About a grant application that had been mysteriously rejected. A grant that would have significantly advanced Dr. Sharma's work, paving the way for groundbreaking discoveries. The article mentioned unforeseen administrative hurdles. It was. Something had gone wrong. Something had gotten in the way. Administrative hurdles. That sounded precisely like David's specialty. And a polite way of saying someone had dropped. I closed the laptop. A strange calm settled over me. The flickering light bulb seemed less irritating now. More atmospheric. Like a spotlight on a stage. I remembered, vaguely, a conversation with an old classmate. He'd gone into finance, the kind of world where ambition was a blood sport. And he'd bragged about manipulating a situation, making a. He'd called it strategic alignment. Sounded like bullshit. But maybe there was something to it. A certain kind of maneuvering that was necessary in certain environments. The air in the apartment felt heavy, expectant. Like before a storm, when the pressure drops and everything holds its breath. Or before you have to tell someone something. I stood up. And walked to the kitchen. Opened a cabinet. Found a dusty bottle of single malt. From my father's birthday, a few years back. I'd never touched it. It had been a gift, meant to be savored, a symbol of something I didn't understand. I poured a small measure into a chipped mug. It smelled like caramel and old wood, A time when things felt simpler, or perhaps, I was just less aware of their complexities. I thought about this person, about Dr. Sharma. About the research position, the one that felt so tantalizingly close, yet so out of reach. And then I thought about my parents. About the quiet way they'd always made me feel like I was just there. A placeholder. A quiet presence in their lives, never the main event. And this was my chance. To be more than a placeholder. To be the main event. To demand attention, not with grand gestures, but with calculated precision. I took a sip of the whiskey. It burned, a pleasant, controlled fire that spread through my chest. It wasn't about getting drunk, it was about. I needed proof. Something to show him, something to show them. Something undeniable. I opened my laptop again. This time, I didn't search for controversy. I searched for Dr. Anya Sharma. And then, I searched for grant proposals. There was a public database. A treasure trove of bureaucratic information, blacked out sections, the institutional equivalent of a shrug. But sometimes, the redactions themselves told their own story. The empty spaces, the missing information, could be. I found one. A proposal from 2 years ago. Submitted by Dr. Sharma. It was heavily redacted, a patchwork of black ink and white paper. But the section on projected outcomes was almost entirely visible. And it was. Ambitious. Almost impossibly so. The projections were so far-reaching, so groundbreaking, that the kind of outcomes that would make headlines, the kind of work that would redefine a field. I looked at the date. It was the same week my father had. The week my mother had been a ghost, drifting through the house, her eyes hollow, her voice a whisper. The week I'd been running errands, making calls. The week I'd needed support, not a lecture on regret. And this guy, the esteemed professor, this person who'd promised me anything. He'd been buried in his work, no doubt, oblivious to the real-world pressures I was facing. He'd promised me anything, but had he ever listened? Had he ever truly seen me? So yeah. The faucet in the landlord's apartment dripped. A slow, steady rhythm. Plink. 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 A constant, irritating reminder of things left undone. And somewhere, a cat was meowing, a persistent, mournful sound. It felt like the soundtrack to my own existence. A low hum of dissatisfaction. I was scrolling through the grant proposal again. Sharma's work swimming before my eyes. It was so grand, so audacious. And yet, it had been rejected. Administrative hurdles. Such a sterile phrase for what? I remembered the sheer exhaustion of those weeks. The world kept spinning, and I was just trying to keep up. I closed the database for a moment. I needed a break. And something to clear my head. I stood up and walked to the small bookshelf in the corner of the living room. It was crammed with a random assortment of. I pulled out a worn copy of A. I didn't even intend to read it, not really. I just needed to hold something solid, something familiar, in my hands. The weight of it was grounding. The smell of the old paper, a faint, musty aroma, was comforting. And the cover art depicted a shadowy figure lurking. I lingered on it for a good 30. Back to the laptop. The grant proposal. The ambitious outcomes. The rejection. I needed to understand the administrative hurdles. What did that even mean? Was it a bureaucratic snafu? And a political maneuver? A deliberate obstruction? David, with his professorial air of detached wisdom, had been unable to offer any specifics. Just a vague mention of complications. I remembered a conversation with my mother again. Not the one about regret, but a different one. I was about 17, and I'd accidentally broken. It was a delicate, painted bird, and I'd expected a storm of anger, a torrent of accusations. Instead, she'd just looked at the pieces, her face unreadable. Sometimes, she'd said, her voice soft, almost a sigh, things just break. No matter how careful you are. It had. But looking back, it felt more like A. I opened another tab. This time, I searched for Dr. Anya Sharma's publications. I wanted to see what she'd been working. There were dozens of articles, academic papers, conference proceedings. All dense, technical, and written in a language that was almost entirely foreign to me. But the titles. The titles hinted at the scope of her ambition. Quantum entanglement in nonlinear systems, theoretical frameworks for. And she was trying to get funding for it. I felt a flicker of something. Not sympathy, not admiration. More like a grim understanding. The world of academia, of scientific advancement, was a brutal one. I needed to find the connection. The missing piece. The reason for the rejection. I went back to the grant proposal document. I zoomed in on the redacted sections, looking. The redactions were extensive, almost complete in some areas. But there were a few words that had managed to slip through the censor's pen. Conflict of interest. Ethical review. External pressures. External pressures. That phrase snagged my attention. What kind of external pressures could derail a grant of that magnitude? I thought about David again. His mumbled excuses, his hesitant delivery. He was clearly uncomfortable. He knew something he wasn't telling me. My landlord's text message reappeared in my mind. Fix. The sheer audacity of it. He wanted me to fix his leaky faucet. It was a microcosm of the larger dynamic, wasn't it? The entitled expecting the competent to fix their. I took another sip of the whiskey. It was warming me up, loosening the knots in my shoulders. I opened another tab. This time, I typed in Dr. Anya Sharma and external pressures. It was a long shot, a fishing expedition. But sometimes, that's how you find things. You cast a wide net and hope for the best. There were a few results. A few forum discussions, a couple of speculative blog posts. Nothing concrete. But one link stood out. It was to a small, obscure legal journal. It was dense, academic, but I skimmed through it, looking for any mention of Dr. Sharma or her institute. And then I found it. A footnote. Referencing a case, a dispute over intellectual property. And a firm that had a history of aggressive tactics. The footnote mentioned undue influence and potential conflicts. My heart gave a little lurch. This was it. This was the external pressure. This was the reason for the rejection. And if this man knew about this, it would explain his reluctance to put me forward. It would explain why he needed evidence. I closed the legal journal. I leaned back in my chair, the laptop. The flickering light bulb overhead seemed to pulse in time with my own heartbeat. I needed to connect this to this guy to understand how he fit into this. I remembered another conversation with my mother. It was years ago, and I was complaining. She'd listened patiently, then said, "Gabriel, life isn't fair. You learn to live with that. Or you learn to make it fair for yourself." I thought about the grant proposal again. The ambitious outcomes. The ambitious woman behind it. She wouldn't let a few administrative hurdles, or even a legal dispute, stop her. She would find another way. I opened a new tab. Typed in this person, Professor and Dr. Anya Sharma. I was looking for any past. There wasn't much. A few co-authored papers from years ago, standard academic fare. But then, I found something else. A press release. From a few years back. Announcing a new initiative at Dr. Sharma's institute, a partnership with a prominent technology firm. And listed as a key advisor on the initiative was Professor. This man, he was involved. More than just a casual acquaintance. He was part of the system. And he knew the players. He knew the game. The pieces were starting to fall into place. David owed me, yes. But he also had his own reputation to protect, his own position within the academic hierarchy. He couldn't afford to champion someone who might become a liability. He couldn't afford to be seen associating with. I looked at the clock on the laptop. It was getting late. The sky outside had deepened to a murky, starless black. I needed to make a decision. David wanted proof. Proof that I could navigate difficult interactions. He wanted tangible evidence. And I had just found it. Not about me, not yet. But about the system. About the way things worked. I opened a new document. And I started to type. Not about my own capabilities, not about my own potential. But about the administrative hurdles. About the external pressures. About the conflict of interest. I wasn't going to explain emotions. I wasn't going to use metaphors unless they. I was just going to lay out the facts. And as I understood them, the faucet in the landlord's apartment continued to drip. Plink. 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 A steady, maddening rhythm. The cat's mournful meow was still audible, a low thrum beneath the silence. I typed. And I kept typing. The words flowed, not with emotion, but with a cold, hard logic. I was building my evidence. One carefully chosen word at a time. I was creating my own opportunity. Or, at least, I was highlighting one that had been conveniently buried. And then, I paused. I looked at the words on the screen. And it felt substantial. Like a solid object in my hands. I needed to make sure this guy understood. I needed to show him that I wasn't. I was someone who could see the cracks in the system. Someone who could connect the dots. I thought about my father's chess set, still frozen mid-game. The queen poised for checkmate. And I had walked away from that game. But this was different. This was a game I intended to finish. I saved the document. And then, I closed the laptop. The screen went black, reflecting my own face, pale and serious in the dim light. The silence in the apartment was still there, but it felt different now. Less like an absence, and more like a space waiting to be filled. Waiting for the next move.